Lots of libertarians talk about various tactics of depriving the state of funds or encouraging the collapse of the state in order to pursue a libertarian social order. There are many forms of these, but for the sake of this video we'll be talking exclusively of the libertarian accelerationist, or collapsitarianism, and the agorist maximalist. I hope to explain not only why these are flawed strategies, but why many of these tactics are bad ideas. Libertarians, just like any group, have a lot of people who have a very shallow understanding of the history of how governments operate, especially when the financial belt tightens. They look to the USSR and think that the only thing that happened was the state couldn't sustain itself and made way for a much more liberalized government and capitalism. They don't know that there were many plays, both externally and internally, that were pressuring the state to either make drastic reforms or make way for a new liberal state. The USSR could have carried on for a lot longer, causing more death, poverty, and gross human rights violations. Many think that when governments are faced with the consequences of their reckless economic behavior, they meet their demise. Historically, this has rarely been the case. Many bankrupt states have just carried on and let their people enjoy all the splendors and joys of eating dirt cookies. The DPRK doesn't care if it can't pay its own bills and carries on as many of its people die of hunger in the streets or in concentration camps, but there's no reason to expect it ending because of its own failings. The incentives of a failing totalitarian state, especially after the execution of Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, is to preserve power and control by any means necessary. They can pass on the responsibility of a surveillance state and enforcement of authoritarian rule to the citizens themselves. They can do this by creating a snitch society and a cult of confession. Things like rampant black markets, lack of funds, corruption hasn't slowed them down. The fear of a revolt has just caused them to clamp down even harder, and there's no end in sight for those 25 million, for lack of a better word, hostages who live there. Accelerating a collapse doesn't necessarily result in the end of the state. It just makes the experience in living in such a state much more unpleasant and much more dangerous. There's still lots of people around the world who are suffering in totalitarian regimes that should have, at least according to these ideas, been long gone by now, and it looks like there is no end in sight to their suffering.
Now, whereas North Korea now, there's been a lot of change. And there's not change at the state level, and there can't be change at the state level, and here's why. In 1989 or 91, I don't remember, in Romania, Ceausescu was a dictator very much like Kim Il-sung, and within a day he was overthrown and him and his wife were shot and assassinated on the street. And Kim Jong-il played this footage to all the people in North Korean government, said, "This is going to be you." If there is any kind of liberalization, they've been lying to these people for 70 years, and they've been putting relatives and friends into camps for 70 years. You're telling me that there's not going to be someone who wants to put a bullet in these people, and with good reason? So they're not in a position to liberalize. I mean, it's a lot easier to tell a small lie than they've been building on these lies for decades, so even a little bit of information undermines the whole thing. I mean, they don't teach them about Hiroshima because that puts the US as the Japanese enemy. They don't teach them about the Holocaust. They only teach them about, Korea. So as soon as they have any information, and especially the big myth, because Kim Il-sung started the Korean War, but they tell them that the US started the Korean War, and at any minute, as soon as they let down the guard, the US are going to come in and kill everybody. When these refugees find out that Kim Il-sung started the Korean War, it's kind of like saying FDR started Pearl Harbor against the Japanese. Doesn't make sense with what you've been taught and everything that's been built on it.
They also don't need to spend lots of money to keep up such programs, because all they really need to do is just disperse the work by instituting a cult of confession and punishing people who get caught not snitching. In the United States, there is a very robust social safety net that costs taxpayers lots of money to keep up. The idea with some collapsitarians is either encouraging or participating themselves and collecting welfare benefits in order to put financial strain on the state. However, it's not only futile, it's counterintuitive and dangerous. It is true that the bulk of government spending in the United States is mostly spent on things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and SNAP. The idea is that if more people take from these programs than they're putting in, eventually the state will hit a wall financially and dissolve. Forgetting, of course, that the U.S. Treasury Department has the ability to produce its own currency, or to borrow more from the Federal Reserve if it needs to get more cash, which it does. A lot of libertarians assume that there will be some sort of libertarian moment when the government or the economy is having a bad time, or they think that people will look objectively at the facts and come to the rational conclusion that the state sucks and that they're the ones responsible for the situation, instead of just listening to some partisan hack who will tell them that the problem was deregulation and greedy businessmen. But this has never been the case. In 2007, we saw a major recession in the United States. Unemployment dipped to one of its highest levels on record. People were taking out all kinds of social safety net programs to cover basic needs while they were newly unemployed. So what was the state's response to this crisis? It was not only to give them more government cheese, but to do everything possible to make sure that cheese kept flowing during the crisis, and dump even more money into government programs as a way to stimulate the economy. And then, the state collapsed and we achieved Ancapistan, right? Well, no. We all paid for it through higher prices of goods and services, through higher taxes, and the American empire still remains the strongest empire in the world, and there's no end in sight. People were not in the streets demanding the abolition of institutions responsible, but instead, they were demanding more government interventions in the economy and more handouts. The 2007 financial crisis should have been a wake-up call to most of the accelerationists who advocate this sort of tactic. But yet, here we are, still talking about it. The bigger problem of advocating that people take government cheese is completely overlooked. The cheese in the United States is in a giant mousetrap, and that mousetrap is extremely hard to get out of. Those of you who have ever worked in an entry-level position or worked with entry-level employees know fully well what happens to some of these employees when they take the cheese. They end up refusing raises, promotions, bonuses, and end up becoming stuck in their positions sometimes for the rest of their lives. Because once you become dependent on these programs, they all just go away with even the slightest amount of pay raises. In order for you to qualify for a lot of these programs, you have to make less than a certain amount. Once you jump over that amount, you are no longer eligible for those services. Now, these are not actual numbers, they're just here for the simplicity of math and illustrating a point. Let's say that your apartment costs you $1,000 a month, and let's say that your expected food bill for that month is about $500. Utilities, internet, and phone are about $400. Now, the state pays for about half of your food bill because you are eligible for SNAP, and all of your rent is paid since you qualify for Section 8, and your monthly income is about $1,000 a month. Now, your boss calls you into his office and congratulates you on a promotion. Now you'll be making $1,500 a month. Sounds great, right? Well, no, because now you are not qualified for Section 8 and SNAP. Because of this, you didn't really gain $500 a month. You've lost $750 because $1,250 of various government welfare benefits are gone. This is a problem that a lot of people who receive government programs go through every day. It's extremely hard for them to escape. It's very possible, and people do it all the time. However, it requires a lot of investment on their part. Either starting up their own business, going to trade school, getting a higher education. A lot of these things most people can't handle. It may very well be the case that you're one of the exceptions to the rule, but statistically unlikely. Just like most people who start a business think that they're going to be the successful ones, and most of them aren't. Taking government money is really doing a deal with the devil, and most people don't read the fine print. Another idea is agorism, the idea that you can end the state through a tactic known as counter-economics. Samuel Edward Konkin III, or SEK3, who I will refer to Konkin from here on out, advocated a tactic to end the state by engaging in various forms of black and gray markets and avoiding the government's demand for taxes. As the agora expands, thanks to its ability to keep prices low and services good, it competes with the government in a way that the government cannot compete with. Some believe that agorism will push the state into a collapse since their enforcement will lack funding, except both of these ideas are fundamentally flawed. Now, this is not to say that there is no benefit that comes from agorism. Quite the contrary. Agorism has many benefits. It encourages technologies that are subversives. It can provide services that are more safer than non-ideological black and gray markets. And they're able to provide goods and services that benefit society that might not be allowed for various reasons, like a goddamn shower head that doesn't suck or a dishwasher detergent that actually works. It also serves as a great education platform of how the freed markets work to people who wanted little more than a fire stick with free movies.
We can go see movies for free now! Anarchy! Anarchy!
The problem with Konkin was that he really oversold a good idea. Back in the days when I made videos about the Zeitgeist movement and the Venus Project and the economic catastrophes that it would inflict, an objection that I would get often from them was a stern reminder that we have things like 3D printers now, and because of this, the problem with scarcity of resources is pretty much resolved. If you need something, you don't need all of these stages of productions. You just need a 3D printer. What they didn't understand is that 3D printers don't magically create matter. They only modify matter into its present self in certain shapes. Modern 3D printers, which are very primitive compared to their potential, require plastic to produce the things that they print. The problem is you just can't print more plastic into the world using a 3D printer. You still need to go out and extract resources from the natural world and modify them in such a way that you can get plastic to feed into a 3D printer. As of now, and into the foreseeable future, 3D printers will still need things that were based on raw resources in order to print things that you want. A lot of these things end up taking lots of time, lots of area, lots of specialized equipment, lots of specialized training and experience to create. These productions also happen in various stages. The people that make 3D printer ink, I guess it's called, often do not go out and extract oil and refine it themselves. They buy it from companies who did it for them, and those companies often buy stuff from other companies at all. Goods of the lowest order or first order production are things that are ready for people to consume, like the monitor or TV that you're watching this on, or the pen that you're chewing. But if you look into how those things are made down the line all the way to the raw resources, like crude oil and metal ore, those are the higher orders of production. These goods are passed through multiple hands before it gets to you. Lots of the highest orders of production would be very visible to the state, like cutting trees for lumber, collecting iron ore, mineral mining, etc., all of which would be very visible to the state compared to, say, cooking meth in your house. Even some of the ones you could possibly conceal on a very low scale, like oil extraction, it still needs large areas of land and very expensive equipment to refine it into usable goods. These higher orders of production would be at least near impossible, if not completely impossible, to be involved with in the Agora. It's only after these goods become lower order goods and more closer to the consumer that they can be involved in the Agora. If you were to hurt the state by just cutting out the tax share of only the lowest orders of goods, most of the production line will still be regulated and taxed. Assuming the state just doesn't start clamping down on those selling in the Agora, they will just tax those who still work above board even more. There will always be a ceiling for how much the Agora can grow with the existence of a state. Now, I'm not telling you to close your OpenBazaar account. Quite the contrary, people need Mexican cigarettes, and they need technologies like cryptocurrencies, not just to access goods and services in a safe manner that are not allowed by the state, but to also promote the idea that you don't need a state to have an economy. But as a way to end the state in itself? No, not even close. But even still, the propaganda when things turn for the state will be, look at these greedy criminals not paying their fair share. This is why we can't provide you with essential services. We need to regulate these digital services, etc. No matter how much of a big guy you are, pushing the state to double down on reckless and dangerous policies is disastrous. For you. There's no guarantee or expectation that the government will throw in the towel. Ever. On the contrary, they will just use it as an excuse to clamp down on you even harder and make your life even more miserable. Education, not just about economics, but critical thinking skills is a much better tool. Libertarian activism and outreach, pushing more parents away from government schooling of kids, and real-world demonstrations of unhampered markets are critical as well. If you're a masochist and want them to clamp down on you a little bit harder, then ooh-woo. However, I don't consent. Anyways, I will talk to you guys later. Worms.